Welcome to the lesson titled Handcuffs 101 Modern Restraining Devices. So, the topics covered in this lesson will include the types of handcuffs on the market, how to double lock a pair of handcuffs, the proper application of handcuffs, and the handcuff key variations. A little history of handcuffs. The first metal handcuffs came into existence with the Bronze and Iron Ages and were one size fits all. The problem with that, it was easy to escape. In 1862, Mr. Adams patented the first adjustable ratchet design, and then in 1879, Tower handcuffs introduced the first double locking cuff design. Handcuffs came closer still to the standard that we see today in 1912, when George Carney invented the first swing cuff. This was revolutionary because it allowed officers to handcuff suspects with one hand. And then in 1932, the Peerless Handcuff Company popularized the universal handcuff key with the introduction of an updated cuff design. So this ratchet design here on the right is the old school style cuffs. As you can see, they're pretty old and outdated, but they were good for the time that they were used. The modern design here on the bottom right is what we call a metal swing cuff. Again, these are very commonly used today by most officers and are easy to apply with one hand. Some hinge style cuffs, which actually I liked, is one of my favorite styles. You can grab the middle and get a pretty good grip on your suspect as far as control once they were applied. And then if you're going to be arresting numerous suspects, maybe in a blitz style or crowd control, plastic zip ties work just as well for a temporary solution. These are the types of handcuff keys on the market today. The standard universal handcuff key is made by Peerless, as mentioned earlier, here on the top left. The bad part about the Peerless key is a little difficult to get a good grip on. The pin handcuff key was my favorite, still is today. You can keep this in a shirt pocket or the pocket of your pants, and it's much easier to turn right and left when you need to. And then a hybrid handcuff key on the bottom is kind of a mixture of both types of keys. So let's talk about how to double lock a pair of handcuffs. Why should you even double lock a pair of handcuffs? Well, one, it prevents the handcuffs from tightening on a suspect's wrist. This keeps the wrist from losing circulation. Number two, it makes it more difficult for a suspect to remove the handcuffs. Double locking makes your scenario safer for you. I highly recommend it. So how do you double lock a pair of handcuffs? Well, it depends on the type of handcuffs you're using. If you have a lever lock, like on the top here, you just slide the lever. There's no tool required. If you have a push pin lock, which most handcuffs have, then you use the back side of the handcuff key and you just push it in basically, and it will lock a spring that will prevent the cuff from tightening. And then the slot lock on the bottom here just shows you a different variation. Again, you will slide a small peg from the back of the handcuff key left or right to prevent the cuff from being tightened further. So these are the types of double lock features on a pair of modern handcuffs. Again, this is showing the swing cuff, how easy it is to push down the top of the key into the hole to lock the handcuffs in place. And you'll feel it, you'll hear it, you'll feel it, and you'll hear it kind of snap into place. And then it prevents the cuffs from tightening. Again, this is where you would apply the handcuff key to double lock a pair of cuffs that are already applied to a suspect's wrist. And you will need to complete the double lock process for each side of the handcuffs, one on each side of the hands. I recommend that you use handcuffs whenever you feel your suspect may resist or attempt to flee. Always double lock a pair of handcuffs when arresting a theft suspect. Don't forget to perform a cursory pat down for weapons after a suspect is handcuffed. This is a great safety measure for anyone making an arrest. And never remove the handcuffs for any reason when waiting for law enforcement to respond. Even those that say, I have to use the restroom, guess what? You're going to have to wait. And never handcuff a suspect to a fixed object, such as a bench or a handrail. In the event of a fire or an earthquake, this could be a deadly situation you don't want to be involved with. And this will conclude the lesson on handcuffs. So, welcome to another lesson titled Current Graffiti Trends, a Security Officer's Guide. So for years, most taggers have been using spray paint and markers to leave their mark on other people's property. I don't know why they continue to do this, but the trend is changing a little bit. And that's basically due to the widespread awareness and age restrictions on spray paint and permanent markers. So why should we even care about graffiti as a security professional? Well, security professionals must be able to recognize current graffiti trends in order to deter and prevent this type of costly vandalism. This type of vandalism costs the client money. Some taggers may classify this act as an expression of art, but make no mistake, it's vandalism in the purest form. So let's talk about recognizing a tagger. So these are some things you can look for to give you a clue or even an indication that somebody you know or a stranger could be a tagger. Are they carrying around fat markers? Of course, not used for test taking or school. Carrying shoe polish or neon pens, and I'll explain that in the near future in another slide. Stencils used for quick tagging. Many taggers have a black book they use to test some of their pieces, and what they call masterpieces. Gloves, this helps keep the paint off their fingers. Backpacks with art supplies, easy access to use when they need it. Sometimes they'll wear a hoodie or a hat or a bandana to hide their face from other people and cameras. And many times, taggers will take photos of their work after it's completed with a cell phone so they can brag about it later. So today, taggers are using colored crayons, grease pencils, block lettered stickers, and black shoe polish. These are all new trends from the past days where they would just use spray paint. Taggers are now sniping some new areas that are a little more stealth, such as electrical boxes, light fixtures, landscaping curbs, trees, believe it or not, bike racks, newspaper racks, and even the actual asphalt in a parking lot. I don't know why they've switched to these areas, but they're becoming a little more creative. So let's talk about the 5 types of graffiti. So a tagger. These are tags, monikers, murals, and they're more ornate than the average spray paint on a wall. So there's gang graffiti. This is used to intimidate or mark their turf or send a message to a rival gang. It's territorial rather than regional. Usually leads to violence and usually involves multiple symbols. A snipe. This is an advertisement type graffiti, such as signs or posters that are stuck on a particular location without permission from the property owner. Hate graffiti. Obviously, this is tainted with racial, religious, and cultural slurs. And then there's the generic or conventional graffiti, which just usually includes random markings with a pen or a marker. Sometimes the old-fashioned spray paint does come out. So let's talk about some graffiti lingo so you know the terminology in this area. So tag. A tag is a stylized signature, usually simple and in one color. Throw up. This is a more elaborate tag, normally used with more than one color, but takes much less time than a piece. Pieces. Now this is short terminology for masterpieces. And these are the large, detailed drawings, sometimes in 3D images or even special effects.
Bombing. This means when they hit many different surfaces with graffiti vandalism, usually at the same time, on the same evening, or the same within the same hour. A crew. This is obviously a group of graffiti vandals, usually 3 to 4 different individuals. Slash. This is when they put a line through graffiti or a line through someone else's graffiti. Burner. A very large, elaborate, detailed piece of graffiti, similar to the masterpiece. And buffing. This is usually the terminology used to remove graffiti with a chemical or other method. So let's talk about some tips to help prevent graffiti vandalism. These are some basic things you can do in your role or as a property owner you can assist with. So keep your property well maintained. Keep your property well lit. Vandals do not like light. Eliminate reasons for loitering, such as benches, payphones, bus stops, etc. Plant bushes or erect fences in areas to impede access to buildings. Install security cameras and motion sensor lighting. Limit access to the roof of a building. Usually this is done with a ladder and a ladder cover with a padlock. Report suspicious activity and encourage neighbors to do the same. This keeps the taggers on their toes. Take pictures or video of all graffiti attacks. This helps to document the vandalism, and law enforcement gives them a clue to the cost involved, and so that if you want to prosecute, which I recommend that you do, you will have a dollar amount of damage that has been inflicted on your property. So how do you know if graffiti is gang related? Well, gang related graffiti is normally easier to read, where tagger graffiti uses symbols and letters that are a little difficult to read. So this is an example of some gang graffiti. A gang member using the moniker Cisco. Gang-related graffiti can also be distinguished as the following points. It's normally written in block-style letters, not always, but normally. It may be done in a gang color, whether that's blue or red, Crips and Bloods. It might contain moniker lists, like nicknames of members of the gang, like we just mentioned in the previous slide. It may be crossed out by a rival gang, and it's usually done in areas where gang activity is prevalent. Let's look at some examples of the new trends in graffiti, as I mentioned earlier. This this picture on the left is chalk graffiti. So chalk that you might see a child playing with outside on the patio, they're now using it to tag walls. And on the right side of the slide here is crayon graffiti. Again, normally used by a child, but now used by today's taggers. This is curb graffiti. Obviously, on the left side there, looks like it was written with a crayon. And on the right side, the typical black spray paint. This is the new trend that you're seeing, and involves shoe polish graffiti. So as you can see, the dots, if you will, that are converted into letters to spell some type of moniker or symbol. And the reason the taggers are moving to shoe polish is, one, it's easy to obtain from a retail store. There's no restrictions or age limits to buy it. And two, if a tagger's caught with shoe polish, they'll just say, well, I use it to polish my shoes. And most people don't think twice about it being used for tagging. So this is a new trend, definitely on the rise. This is a strange thing, this trend, tagging trees. I mean, I don't understand why they do it, other than the fact that they feel maybe it's harder to remove, or it's more of a permanent location. But these are two examples here. You can see some gang graffiti on both of these trees. And And again, another tree here on the left, very difficult to cover up with matching paint, as you can see. And on the right hand side, you got some trash dumpster graffiti, which I still don't understand why a tagger would want to tag an actual trash dumpster, but there you have it. So in conclusion, don't discount graffiti vandalism as a harmless prank. It is a crime, and treat it as one and report it to the police. If someone's caught, follow through with an arrest and prosecute. This may be the only way you can deter future vandalism. Be proactive. You are responsible for your property, your client's property, and the upkeep of those locations. So this will conclude our lesson, and I'll see you on the next one. Well, welcome to this lesson, Testifying in Court, Practical Preparation. You know, sooner or later in your career as a security professional, you're going to ask yourself this question. They want me to testify. How should I prepare? Well, testifying in court of law can be intimidating for some people, but it happens frequently in the security business. It's probably only a matter of time before you'll be subpoenaed to appear in court and provide your testimony before a judge and a jury. But that's okay. We have some basic guidelines for you to follow, and in no time you'll be a seasoned witness. First impressions make a difference. Dress professional. I can't stress this enough. Wear a white shirt, a tie, a dress coat, a pair of slacks. Wear shoes that take a shine. If you don't own a sport coat or a suit coat, a dress shirt with a tie and slacks is appropriate. But just don't wear casual clothing like jeans, a t-shirt, shorts, etc. Your reputation and your credibility will suffer, not only from the judge, but from the jury as well. Represent yourself and your client well. Understand why you're being asked to testify. Take some time to review the details of the incident that you are providing testimony for. For example, the date and time of the incident. What happened? Do you remember the details? Do you remember the suspect's actions or the crime that was committed that day? Do you remember any spontaneous statements that were made by the suspect or a witness, such as, "I'm sorry for stealing," or "I was drinking all day," etc.? These are important details for you to include in your testimony. Some questions you may be asked from both sides of the fence, whether it be the prosecution or the defense. You're going to be asked questions about your character, your position, your experience, your training. This is very important. Many defense attorneys are looking for a lack of training. Don't let that be you. You're going to be asked about the events surrounding the crime. What was the weather like, the lighting conditions, the crowds? How did you get involved in the incident, or how did you get involved in the arrest? These are going to be details that you're going to need to provide. For example, did the suspect's actions look suspicious? If so, you should be able to justify your actions. For example, the suspect was looking inside the windows of a parked vehicle when I approached him. When dealing with a theft suspect, be careful when explaining your reasoning for watching a potential suspect. Defense attorneys are always looking for a bias or a discrimination angle. That's their job, to make you look discriminatory. Stay away from, "I was watching him because he looks like a homeless bum," or "he caught my eye because he looks like a dirtbag." These are phrases and terms that are difficult to explain, not only to a defense attorney, but also to a jury. A better answer would be, "The store was monitoring the razor blades because they were being stolen every week. The suspect approached the razor section, so I began to watch him." This is much more politically correct, much more accurate, and appropriate for a jury to hear. The details are important. I can't stress this enough. But You are never expected to remember every single detail surrounding a particular incident, especially if it was 2 years ago or 5 years ago. It's not uncommon for court cases to get backed up so much that you'll be dealing with a case that was 3 to 4 years old. So what helps is to have a good understanding of what transpired. So go back and review the lesson titled Basic Report Writing, where we talk about documenting the details of exactly what happened. Another crucial element of testifying in court is honesty. When you are under oath, there's nothing more important than projecting an honest answer. And, I want to remind you that perjury is a crime in nearly every state in the country. So my advice is pretty simple. Tell the truth. And if you don't know an answer to a question, it's okay. Just simply say, I don't know, or I don't recall, versus trying to guess the right answer and look stupid on the stand. A good defense attorney will try to trip you up and push your buttons. Don't let them get under your skin. And don't give them a reason to question your credibility. Take some time to think about your answer before you make a statement. When you're on the oath, you're not obligated to answer a question in a certain amount of time, unless a judge demands it, which is very rare. It's also perfectly normal to request that a question be repeated. Defense attorneys don't like this tactic, but if you don't understand what's being asked from a defense attorney, just simply say, can you repeat the question, please? And they will. Here's some dirty defense attorney tactics that have happened to many security professionals on the stand. Here's a specific tactic that was used on me recently during a burglary case where I testified. So, Mr. Security Person, how long have you worked for your employer? Response, approximately 5 years. And you worked there because you couldn't get hired as a police officer? Of course, the answer was no. The defense attorney was testing me to see if I would reveal something that could be used against my credibility. For example, he was hoping I would say something like, I was a cop several years ago, but I got fired for excessive force. Not so fast, Kimosabi. Here's another example of a loaded question. So why did you focus your attention on my client in the first place? What about him made you watch him closer? Can you tell the jury that, please? Well, a bad answer would be, he looks suspicious. Oh, okay. Can you describe what it means to be suspicious? I don't know. That's a tough one, which is exactly why it's a bad answer. A better answer would be, he was stumbling around the parking lot, and when I approached him, I detected a strong odor of alcohol. Do you see the difference? You're talking about facts, not opinion. Or how about this one? Did you come here today to testify because you wanted to put my client in jail? Answer, no, I came here today because I was issued a subpoena to come here. No further questions. Again, a defense attorney looking for an angle to make me look like a bad person, which makes my testimony unworthy. Don't fall for it. So in conclusion, review these tips again if you're called to testify in the future. Remember, as a security professional, your testimony can be an integral piece of a criminal case. Represent yourself well and be prepared. And that will conclude this lesson, and we'll see you on the next one. Well, welcome to this lesson titled Retail Security Officer Training, an Introduction. Let's talk about your assignment as a retail security professional. Your primary assignment is to protect the assets of the company. Now, this would include both product and employees, as well as the structure of a building. You're there to maintain high visibility. Your presence alone will deter crime. You're there to assist management as needed, especially in an unusual situation. You're there to be a good witness. So always have a notebook and a pen, and wear a watch so that you know what time your incidents occur. Safety and liability should always be at the forefront of your mind. You should always be concerned about your personal safety, the safety of employees, safety of customers, and the company. Safety, again, number one priority. Never jeopardize your safety over the loss of product. It's just not worth it. Always evaluate your surroundings and ask yourself, is this going to escalate? Am I outnumbered? Should I let this walk? Again, keep safety as the number one priority. Always control the hands of a suspect that you're dealing with or that you're going to arrest. Weapons are abundant at this time in the world, and we're going to review weapons in a future lesson that you'll be amazed what's available to the bad guys. Always perform a pat-down search for safety. This is allowed under most penal code laws, so it's not unusual for you to do a pat-down looking for weapons. You always want to ask yourself, what can injure me in this environment? For example, if you escort a suspect to a break room or a back storage room, you always want to be cognizant of what's there. Is there a box of tools or a hammer or a rubber mallet or even some liquid cleaner? I remember an incident where I was involved with several years ago where we arrested a female suspect who was very cooperative. We handcuffed her, we took her to a back storage area, put her in a chair, and the second she saw an opportunity, with her hands handcuffed behind her back, she was able to grab a bottle of liquid cleaner with a high concentration of alcohol and squirt it directly in the eye of my partner and disabling him immediately. And then she tried to run. Of course, we caught her, but the point to the story was, we were not cognizant of that bottle of cleaner next to her, and she took advantage of it. So also, never turn your back on anyone when you're engaged with or you're arresting. Again, a small female, many people discount this as meek and humble, and you'd be surprised at what a scorned woman can do as far as try to hurt you when she's thinking about going back to jail. And remember to always follow company policy. Never pursue off the property, if that's a general rule, and many times it is. It's just too dangerous. Never enter or attempt to remove a suspect from a vehicle. Again, personal safety should be number one. Never handcuff a subject to a fixed object. If there's a fire or an earthquake in a particular building at the time of arrest, and you have a suspect handcuffed to a bench or a metal fixture or anything close to that, that suspect is not going to survive. You do not want to be responsible for that. Liability must be considered at all times. You can affect the company and you personally by making bad decisions. So don't give anyone a reason to consider a lawsuit. Use of force, a very, very important topic. It must be justified. Use of force usually is justified if you're reacting to being struck or attacked by somebody and you're defending yourself. That's totally justified. But if you're going to give somebody 20 or 30 strikes in the face just because you're upset with them, that will not be justified. And always remember, you have 100 sets of eyes watching you at all times. Why? Because you're security. You're a professional. You're expected to do the right thing. CCTV can be a great tool to defend your actions in these scenarios, but on the flip side, it can also be used against you if you do something out of the ordinary or against somebody's personal rights. What's the most important book you should be familiar with? This one's easy, the State Penal Code. Know this book back and forth. It's so important. Why do you ask? Well, knowing the penal code of your particular state gives you the knowledge of the crime that's been committed. And it helps you guide your decisions whether to make an arrest or to release somebody. If you know the elements of a crime in your mind, in your head, without busting out the book and reading a recap real quick, then you can make quick decisions, and you know when it's time to put the handcuffs on somebody. And the flip side is also true. You'll know when you don't have enough elements of a crime, you're gonna have to let that person walk. So, knowing the penal code also prevents liability of a false arrest. You don't want to be accused of arresting somebody when a crime actually has not been committed. Knowledge of the penal code gives you an edge as a security professional. Some penal codes you should be familiar with: petty theft, grand theft, robbery, vandalism, trespassing, among others. But these are the top 5 for a retail environment specifically. You will deal with these more usually than any other crimes that are committed. Now, some things to consider when making an arrest. You want to ask yourself, is there enough evidence of a crime before I place this person in custody? If there's not, let them walk. Swallow your pride. You need to ask yourself, did you witness the crime? And if not, who did? And will that person be able to testify to the accuracy of what happened? Who's the victim? In other words, if 2 customers are fighting each other and none of them want to prosecute, do you have a crime? Well, sometimes, but usually not if they don't want to prosecute. Who's going to sign a citizen's arrest form that allows the police officer to take that person to jail? Is the crime accurately documented? Again, go back to the lesson titled Basic Report Writing. It is so important to document your actions and what happens in detail. Who will maintain custody of the suspect until law enforcement arrives? I've seen this trip up many security professionals. An arrest is made, and then they either don't have the time to wait or don't want to wait and hand off the suspect to maybe a member of retail management or a basic clerk, and it's a bad move. Many times this person's not trained to handle somebody in custody, and things go south very quickly. Remember, you have options. Consider what crime was committed. What was the suspect's reasoning? Is it a believable excuse, or is it a straight out lie? Can you confirm the suspect's ID? Do they have identification? Do you know the suspect? Is he or she recognized as a regular customer to that location? What about the age of the suspect? A juvenile should never be released on his or her own, without a adult to take custody of them. You don't want to be liable for releasing a juvenile. And was there violence or narcotics involved? Many times suspects that are caught committing crimes also have drugs in their pocket. It's not something you can just take lightly and turn the other eye and pretend it never happened. You have to document these cases and make a decision if you're going to arrest somebody or release them. Also consider safety when you're going to make an arrest. Is there a flight risk? Has this person been combative? If so, you need to place them properly in a position of non-confrontation. And in my opinion, that usually means sitting on the floor of a particular location with their feet out in front of them and their legs crossed. This prevents quick action from suspect bolting or trying to make an attempt to escape. Always try to prepare your reports before calling the local law enforcement agency. This will help expedite the process when they arrive. And notify your supervisor when you make an arrest, so that if something else were to happen or you were to get a complaint about your behavior, they would have a heads up. Suspect must sign a release of liability. If you're going to let somebody go after making a stop and a detainment, make sure they sign some sort of liability releasing you. Advise the suspect of trespassing laws. In other words, you're not to return to this location or you'll be arrested for trespassing. In California, it's PC 602. Advise a parent or guardian and have them sign a release, again, for a juvenile. Advise the suspect of your right to file a crime report. Even if you release them today, you have a year and a day in the state of California to file a criminal report. Sometimes that helps keep them away from the location. If a suspect has a means of payment, consider allowing them to pay if the client agrees. But again, if you allow somebody to pay for merchandise that is stolen, you cannot usually make an arrest at that time. Some do's and don'ts. Do think safety. Treat others with respect. Be professional. Do control your emotions and your language. Use only the force necessary to make an arrest, and document that force when it is used. Do use a female witness when you have a female suspect. Even when you do it 100% right, this will always help you in the long run from false accusations. And do report the facts accurately. Here's some don'ts. Don't be unprofessional. Don't use foul language or threaten the suspect. Don't forget the zero tolerance policy, where you would mock somebody for their race, religion, or their gender. It's not worth it. Stick to the professionalism and the topic of your arrest. Don't ever falsify a report or a company document. Even if you make a bad stop or you make a mistake, things happen. Don't falsify a time record. These are the fastest ways to be terminated and ruin your career. Don't release a suspect without a good reason. In other words, don't release somebody just because it's time for you to go home and you're hungry. There's much more liability here at stake. And don't violate company policy. Set the example. The courtroom. What happens if we go to court? Will the evidence be in your favor? Will you remember your involvement? Testimony is important. We just had a lesson on court testimony, and if you have not reviewed that lesson, I encourage you to go back there and take a look. Some defense attorney questions will try to trip you up. For example, what made you watch my client? Be careful. You don't want to say anything that's going to incriminate you. And your reputation is second to none. This is the number one thing that keeps you a security professional. Long-standing, strong relationships with law enforcement agencies and the communities that you serve is a priority. Your reputation will always come back in your favor if you do the right thing for the right reason. Always have a spirit of cooperation with law enforcement. Try and help them as much as possible. And again, don't forget, always exert professionalism. Some tips and suggestions. Don't get too comfortable with the employees in your environment on an everyday basis. This can cause problems where you're having favoritism towards a certain employee, and it will ruin your credibility. Do stay alert at the end of your watch. You never know when a suspect may be attempting to get revenge or commit a crime against you. So always communicate with your supervisor based on the circumstances of your post, and always maintain a professional appearance. So this will conclude this lesson, and we'll see you on the next one. Welcome to this lesson titled A Security Officer's Guide to Putting Out Fires. Firefighting Basics. Security officers are often called upon to react as first responders during an emergency situation. Since a fire can ignite at any time and any place, every security officer should have some basic skills related to fire extinguisher training. You don't want to be like the photo in this slide where you're trying to put out a huge fire with a little bucket of water. Not a good place to be. Let's start with an introduction to fire extinguishers. These are some of the basics, but very important information. Using the wrong fire extinguisher on a fire can actually make matters worse. So it's important to understand the fire extinguisher ratings. The number on a fire extinguisher indicates the approximate square footage of fire the extinguisher can handle. For example, a fire extinguisher with a numeral rating of 4A can handle twice the range of a fire extinguisher with a 2A rating. Now here's a visual guide of how a fire extinguisher works. This photo shows a detailed look of the design of a common fire extinguisher found in most homes and business environments. This gives you a nice visual of how an actual extinguisher works. So you have the safety pin on top, you have a handle, a nozzle, a pressure gauge. The tube is contained with high pressure gas or a chemical or water compound. Now, the safest and fastest method to putting out a small fire is to use the correct type of extinguisher. Let's talk about those. There are actually 5 classes of fire extinguishers. And I don't know if you knew that or not, but I didn't when I started in this business. Many security officers do not know this simple fact. Let's talk about the 5 types. So a Class A fire extinguisher is usually pressured water, multi-purpose dry chemical, larger size halon, and wet chemicals. So this would be a great common fire extinguisher to use to put out a fire in trash, wood, or paper. There's a Class B fire extinguisher. This is a multi-purpose dry chemical, carbon dioxide and halon, and this is sometimes used for liquid and grease. A Class C fire extinguisher. It's a multi-purpose dry chemical, carbon dioxide, halon, and a wet chemical for electrical equipment. So example, if you have a breaker box that starts on fire, or there's an electrical arc from maybe a battery or battery room, equipment room, this is the type of extinguisher you would want to use on that type of fire. Then there's the Class D fire extinguisher. This is for combustible metal fires only, very important. And then a Class K fire extinguisher, which is basically for wet chemicals, a lot of times used in a cooking or kitchen environment. So those are the 5 classes of fire extinguishers. Very important to know the difference. So let's talk about some firefighting criteria if you're going to make a decision to actually try to fight a fire. Now, the fire extinguishers in most buildings are mainly for the use of trained emergency response personnel or the fire department. As a security officer, you may have the following responsibilities in an emergency. You must know the emergency procedures and evacuation routes of your current location. This is very important. And you must always sound an alarm regardless of the size of the fire. A small fire can get out of hand very quickly. Remember, do not attempt to fight a fire unless the fire is small and is contained. You have a safe egress route where you can escape without exposure to the fire, and that the available extinguishers you are using are rated for the size and type of the fire. If there's ever any doubt about whether you should fight a fire or it's not safe, evacuate for your personal safety and the safety of others. Let's talk about fighting the fire. Once you've made the decision to take action, let's use the pass method to put the fire out. Before we discover that though, let's make sure the pressure gauge on the fire extinguisher shows that it's fully charged. You are not going to fight a fire with an empty fire extinguisher. Very, very important. So the pass method. The pass method is very simple. P for pull the pin, A for aim low at the base of the flame, S for squeeze the handle, and S again for sweep side to side. Very simple. This is a great acronym to remember when fighting a small fire. The pass method. Pull the pin, aim low, squeeze the handle, sweep side to side. If you follow these guidelines and use the proper class of fire extinguisher, you'll be properly trained to put out a fire in the course of your duties. This is valuable training and knowledge to have under your belt when you're working as a security officer. And who knows, you may even save a life or two. So, again, when fighting fires, always remember, be safe. This will complete this lesson, and we'll see you on the next one.